Okay, so wonderful. So welcome everyone. We've got an exciting presentation for you today. And I'd just like to introduce Dr. Fred Burge, Dr. Marilyn McDonald, Alana Delahunty-Pike, Judy Porter, and Donna Rubenstein. And have I missed anyone from the team? I think that's it. Okay, that's our list of presenters. So just thrilled to have you here today. And our presentation is, I guess, associated with BRIC, Nova Scotia, Building Research for Integrated Primary Health Care. And yeah, we love it when we can have some collaborations. So thrilled that you'll be able to be a part of our Wednesdays at noon. And this session is being recorded. So I'm going to turn it over to you and your team. We also have the chat bar, so we can watch that to see if there's any questions along the way. And we'll turn it over to you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having us. So I'll just start us off, and then all of the different team members will speak through the presentation. So we'll be presenting on our project, which is called the PriCARE study, and we're looking at case management in primary care for frequent users of healthcare services with chronic diseases and complex care needs. So those are the presenters, which Megan has introduced us all. All right, so the aims of our presentation. So we'll be introducing the PriCARE study, just give everybody a little glimpse of what it's all about. We'll define case management, discuss the realist synthesis, and which was sort of the initial work to this project, and then the realist evaluation, which we're doing. We'll highlight the role of BRIC Nova Scotia within the study, discuss early findings of case management implementation in primary care settings across our 5 participating provinces. We'll provide an overview of challenges in primary care settings. And we will offer ways to overcome challenges in primary care settings. And then we will highlight the patient partnership within this PriCARE study. And I will just mention that the implementation findings, that comes from all qualitative data collected pre-COVID, because this study began in August 2019. And all of the data is from focus groups and interviews conducted with nurse case managers, various providers at the primary care clinics, and any office or sort of administrative support that were helping to support the study. So the PriCARE study is looking at the implementation of a nurse-led case management approach for patients with 1 or more chronic conditions and complex care needs who tend to be frequent users of the healthcare system. And it's taking place in primary care clinics in Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador. And there are 30 patients per clinic with 7 participating clinics, and Quebec is sort of our lead site, with the nominated principal investigator being Dr. Catherine Houdon, who's a family doctor there. And it's in part of the Visage's research team, a larger research team there in Quebec. So case management is, I don't know, not everyone is familiar with case management, but it is a collaborative approach that's used to assess, plan, facilitate, and coordinate care to meet patient and sometimes family, if they're involved in the patient's care, their healthcare needs. And so it's done through communication with the various people that are involved, and available healthcare resources. So all the way from community resources to tertiary care if needed. As well as sectors outside of the health system, so community-based social services, housing, supports, that sort of thing. And then the intention is to improve individual and health system outcomes. So a realist synthesis was completed by various members of the research team. Fred, who was one of those members, I was not. To provide an initial theory from the literature for the realist evaluation, which would then inform the PriCARE program. And this realist synthesis sort of, it focuses on understanding the mechanisms by which an intervention works or might not work. So the intervention in this case would be case management in the primary care setting. And then the realist evaluation, which is the stage that we're in at the moment, will test and advance the theory that was derived from the synthesis empirically with different stakeholders. So those stakeholders are obviously the patients, various clinic providers that are involved in the patient care, the nurse case manager, who's the primary person involved in the patient's care. They have develop rapport, and they have a pretty frequent contact with the patients, as well as any clinic managers. So in that primary care setting. And then, so the realist evaluation focuses on what works for whom, under what circumstances, and why. And it's interesting because every primary care setting in all of the different provinces are different. So we want to see, what works, where it's working, why it's working, who is it working for, and if it's not working. This is just a diagram of the various steps of case management, a little bit easier to consume than the definition. So there is an initial evaluation of the patient's needs and preferences. So this is an initial meeting that happens with once the patient is recruited into the study. So they have an initial meeting with their nurse case manager, and they go over, various things that are going on for the patient, health-wise, also some social factors. And they talk about, okay, what are we going to address and how are we going to address it? And then with the patient, the nurse case manager then develops and maintains this very patient-centered individualized services plan, or ISP, which is a very comprehensive plan that involves needs, obviously, goals, different providers that will be involved, different resources that will be used or accessed. And then it's really maintained on a pretty frequent basis. So it goes, the nurse case manager and the patient tend to go back to it on a pretty regular basis. Then, of course, there's a coordination of services amongst all of the partners. So that's typically done by the nurse case manager. And then there's an education and self-management support system, really, or learning for the patients, and if they have family members involved. And so I'll hand it over to Fred Burge now.
Thanks, Alana. So in setting up this context, it seemed that one of the opportunities to conduct some research in this area was to use a platform that had been created by CTNHR 5 or 6 years ago under the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research. And one of the elements of the CTNHR SPOR initiative was to try to strengthen and build capacity in primary healthcare research in the country by helping each province build a research infrastructure, if it didn't already exist, and then create funding opportunities to help provinces do interprovincial work. And one of the things that has been a challenge in the Canadian setting is trying to take advantage of the different contexts in different provinces and the learnings from each provinces and share them across provinces. So BRIC is the Nova Scotia version of this platform for research. It's the Primary and Integrated Healthcare Innovations Network, which was funded by both CTNHR and Research Nova Scotia as a funding partner. And it really has helped us launch an interprofessional platform that its goal, excuse me, is to facilitate researcher, provider, patient, and knowledge users, which might be health system folks or policy folks, within Nova Scotia and across the country. We want to facilitate research that responds to real-time needs of primary healthcare stakeholders for evidence to inform both policy and practice innovation. And underpinning this all is an attempt to build capacity in primary and integrated healthcare research. You go to the next slide, Alana. There we go. So just to let you know, each network has these 4 components of researcher, science, sciencey type folks, clinical provider type folks, decision maker type folks, and our patient partner type folks. And that's why you see a variety of us here today. We haven't brought along one of the decision maker folks for this particular presentation because we wanted to focus specifically on the patient partners' participation. But this project was funded through a funding opportunity called the Programmatic Grant Competition, which was targeted for the networks, and you had to include 4 provinces at a minimum in order to do this work. So the research project had to have a platform of implementation across 4 provinces. BRIC, as a research infrastructure, helped in the pre-funding support by helping to put together the multidisciplinary team from its member network. We have over 350 members in the network of the different kinds of folk I talked about, and helped to find matching funding partners, because all of the projects inside the SPORE Primary and Integrated Healthcare Innovations network requires equal matching from some other partner. And part of the strategic plan there is to invest local interest in the research that's being conducted, so that the research is designed in response to local and national needs, and therefore will entice local partners to be matching ones, because we're trying to respond to those needs. In the post-funding, after the grant was successful, BRIC also has played a role in helping to hire project coordinators, helping to identify patient partners, and helping to identify the clinics within the health system and health systems across the country in which to conduct the research. Next slide. I think that's me out, isn't it? Is this Marilyn in now? Or is this last?
This is you, Fred.
Yeah, okay, I'll finish this one off
If you like.
in the transition. So implementing in primary care clinics. So case management, well, and we might get a chance to have a conversation just about the term all by itself and what people think about that. I can see Donna smiling because one of the great things about our patient partnership has been helping us understand the historical language that still rests inside some of our ways of thinking and the way we do research and the way we frame that language. But case management can be time intensive to implement in the primary care setting. It does require some training time for people to skill up and to do the preparatory work prior to the patient recruitment for inclusion in case management activity. There can also be challenges with recruiting for us patients into the study. So I do want to just kind of say for a second that in framing the presentation today, there's kind of 2 notions of implementation. We're mostly talking about trying to implement the study at this point. Then there's the whole implementation of the case management role and activity with patients. And clearly the language of implementation research is quite dominant in some of the research we do today. So it is important to kind of play out what we're meaning by implementation. So we're talking a little bit about what it's been like to try to do this study and not really here with the actual implementation evaluation findings that are at the end of the study yet. So there are challenges with recruiting patients into the study. Provider engagement is a really key element to successful implementation of case management. We do need strong managerial leadership, engagement, and support with the introduction of case management and planning. And for any of you that have tried to work in a community or primary healthcare setting, you'll know that we're really only in the last 10 years building that kind of organizational managerial system inside primary healthcare. We haven't had it. So looking for strong leadership in that role is one of the things that's been or can be helpful in trying to implement the research and the case management strategy. And trained, skilled, and experienced nurses as case managers who get mentorship supports the positive implementation of the research and the role into the clinical setting. So I'll hand off to Marilyn here.
Okay. So challenges, naturally, no matter what study we do, there are always associated challenges. Fortunately, around the time I joined this project, I had recently completed literature review on case management, which was part of contract that I had with Nova Scotia Health. So I really had my mind in the case management world. So this was actually a nice opportunity to join PriCARE, and I've really enjoyed the work and this team. And so as identified here, the whole notion of building research time into the role of the family practice nurse. And Fred made a reference to really the embryonic stage of research in the primary care setting. And so there are many settings where research is just part of doing business, and it's built into the way how each and every day unfolds. That wasn't necessarily the case in the clinics that participate in this study. So you can see where you're trying to build capacity and do a study at the very same time in settings where this necessarily has not been the way workflow normally unfolds. And then, of course, patient participant engagement in research. Getting the patients interested and engaged takes considerable time. And I can just, when I think of any studies that I do and where I'm part of, or helping with recruitment, or even just once a person has indicated interest, the time that it takes to sit with them, have them understand a study, and sort of get them interested and excited about the prospect. Because the population we're talking about, this is normally a group of individuals with several conditions. And so just the energy that they have, it may not necessarily be a lack of interest, but the effort it's going to take and what it takes for them to live with their various conditions day to day. And so just in listening to us can be one more thing that maybe, and it may be just the day that I begin to introduce it to them, could be maybe their worst day of the week. And so being really cognizant of the work that they're already doing to live with their conditions, and then being asked to do something else. If I could really, in other words, as I'm having the conversation as that family practice nurse, if I can come up with some hooks that really sort of grab their interest, then my chances are going to be better. But we certainly can't underestimate this challenge, and being able to really sell the idea or engage the person in a way so that somehow all of a sudden the light bulb comes on that, hey, you know, maybe there is a pearl in this for me. So then how might we overcome these challenges? And so certainly thinking about structures and the stage at which research is actually being lived in the primary care setting. If the administrators aren't sold, I guess, for lack of a better way to put it, then certainly that's going to be a structural barrier in terms of success in that setting. And I believe this is highly doable, but it definitely, it takes an investment, and a study like this is a nice opportunity for an in order to begin that, to address any structural barriers that might be present to the conduct of research. Understanding the whole workflow of that particular center. And I think the nature and extent of the understanding of what's currently goes on is key to how the activities that we would need to engage in to embed the research into that setting. And for example, since the family practice nurses are really key to implementation of case management, then when the primary care nurses, whether they've been there or whether they're new to the including that as part of their position description. And as you can imagine, someone who's already in the role, they're already thinking about, how am I going to do this? Like I'm already working full-time with my duties and responsibilities. So you can clearly see that between the administrator and the family practice nurses, that a negotiation of the duties and responsibilities is going to have to take place as to what might be looking at the other positions in the clinic, how might duties and responsibilities be reorganized so that the family practice nurse can actually do the work of case management. Prepare resources for the family practice nurse to assist with the role. And certainly you can imagine, like, toolkits are so a part of many projects these days. And so I can really see that resourcing a family practice nurse in order to be able to execute that role, the case management role, that there can be a lot of learning provided in relation to case management that would resource the individual or individuals and really contribute to success. And in the course of the study, the regular check-ins with that family practice nurse, and I really can't overemphasize that because there's so much transition work that's going on, and it's so easy to forget about the project, the study itself, because you're so involved in the day-to-day. And yet, if we get the project right, if we really do the work we need to do with the study, then it really keeps it sort of on the front burner. And frequent check-ins is a way, because inevitably that everyone at the clinic, but the family practice nurse in particular, there's always going to be, on a day-to-day basis, things that they wonder about, things that, and yet maybe not take the time to stop and reach out to a team, one of the team. But if we're sort of, I don't mean to say in their face, but sort of a presence as much as possible, then they're going to know, oh, wow, person X is going to be checking in with me, so I can run that past them. And so now they feel a part of the study. And I think the whole adoption and it contributes to the possibility for case management to be integrated and to become part of that workflow. And then communication strategies. Certainly that those regular check-ins are very, a very tangible communication strategy, but it can be, just in, let's say, for example, in my community, if it was me that the family practice nurse was communicating with, and based on that, whatever communication took place, it struck me that, oh, wow, I think if the family practice nurse could actually have a conversation with one of our patient partners based on the work that they do, the understanding they have, the contribution they've made, I know that they can really provide some insights for how a concern may be addressed. And so I think the across our team communication, and then the communication within the primary care setting itself, is key to the project being all that it can be and the success of the case management implementation. Oh, and before our patient partners start, I just want to make a comment that it's been absolute pleasure, and our patient partners to me are exemplary partners. I've learned so much from them, and it just makes me excited to think about all that they've done and what tremendous potential we have with patient partners. So over to them.
Well, thank you, Marilyn. That's a great lead-in. I almost should not continue, but I will. So, patient partnership. You now have an understanding of the PriCARE project, and you've heard just a little bit of insight on some of the implementation challenges and some ways to address them. So Judy and I are here to talk now about what we think is one of the most underutilized resources available to help bridge some of those gaps, and not just to bridge gaps, but to expand the possibilities or the impact of research success. So some of us call it the secret sauce of patient partnership. So in our short time, we're going to share some insights as to why this could be your secret sauce, and more importantly, how it might work. So what does operationalizing it look like? You know, going beyond theory and on the ground in real life. So this will include some tangible examples that you might be able to take away for your next project. So next slide, please. So let's begin with a moment to consider the patient partner role. How do we fit on the team? So in simple terms, patient partners provide us another layer of perspective to complement researchers. Judy and I have discovered that we can all look at the same thing and see it differently. Having an environment that's open to hearing different opinions and ideas is essential. Working together and respecting different perspectives is critical to making it work. And it's not just making it work. More importantly, I think we're all trying to take it to the next level. It's a bit like cooking. Getting the right temperature and the time makes a difference to the final product. Next slide, please. So our experience suggests we see things through different lenses. So researchers, next slide, look through a lens based on time, budget, validity, ethics, and other similar dimensions. And patient partners, next one, look through a lens of personal experiences, vulnerability, expectations, language, culture, life experiences. So although very different, these sometimes seemingly conflicting or opposing perspectives could actually bring a richness to the overall picture. So if we put it all together, there's potential for a really powerful team with exceptional results. So it's a bit like the idea we used to talk about creative tension. If you can find the right balance, it's like magic. So I Googled recently the definition of research. I was kind of curious, and I found dozens of sources, and they all had one theme in common. Research is about creating new knowledge, new understanding, generating new concepts. Well, patient partners bring a new perspective and is a way to achieve that. So the challenge now, we say, is how do we achieve it? So how do we operationalize what you sometimes hear, patient engagement? That's the hard part. How do we create conditions for meaningful patient partnership? So keep in mind, the concept or the model of patient engagement is fairly young in Canada. It's less than 10 years. So we're all patient partners, researchers in learning mode, which really means that we need patience, commitment, and a willingness to be a little bit uncomfortable. So we're going to take a look at a few practical tips. And it's a bit like starting a garden. or cooking 101. That's something we can all relate to. The foundation is critical to how it turns out. So we might have limited control of this, what researchers call the system barriers, but how we approach patient partnership is really in our sphere of control. So I often use this garden, the new garden metaphor, as it's a helpful way to think about it. So when does the relationship begin? It's best to be in the early days because the foundation stuff really does make a difference. So include patient partners at the start of a project. It may take extra time and it may even be a bit uncomfortable, but the payoff is tenfold and will show up later. How we connect with patient partners. And Marilyn talked about communication. This is very similar to you were talking about the nurse practitioners. The same thing with patient partners. How we do it and how often is important. So strive for ongoing conversations. We really should go beyond emails and formal team meetings, which are important, no doubt, but we also need to build in the informal communication. For example, similar to Marilyn talking about check-ins, periodic phone calls, one-on-ones. It will really strengthen the relationship. The one-to-one is a great way to pick up on sometimes early issues before they grow into serious problems. And not just the problem side, but also to identify ideas that might surface, they might not surface because of awkwardness. In the early days, for us as patient partners to express thoughts in a meeting can sometimes be a challenge because we sometimes feel like outsiders. So it's like that new garden, and everybody's tried a new garden at some point. Some extra effort in the early days, preparing the ground, extra time nurturing the seedlings pays off. Once established, the plant needs a lot less to grow. Now, keep in mind, you still need some watering and some fertilizing and maybe a bit of periodic pruning, but with time, a lot less is needed than the front end. So fourth, make sure you have 2 patient partners at least per team. It reduces the pressure on one person. And of course, as we talked about before, it recognizes that patient partners bring different experiences and backgrounds and often can help when you're bringing on people who are new to researchers. So you to research. So you might have one patient partner with a lot of experience and one who's new. Flexibility, be ready to adapt. Like gardens, plants, people have different qualities and needs to grow and thrive. It's not one size fits all. And finally, it's a learning journey. The best relationships evolve over time, and especially when you have shared experiences. Working through the tough stuff is possible with the right mindset and when there's a strong and trusting relationship in place. Working with patient partners can be transformative for both the project results and the team members. And I think you heard Marilyn mention a little bit, refer to her experience. And with PriCARE, we found that not only was the research impacted, but so were the patient partners and the researchers. So now Judy will walk you through some concrete examples from our project.
Oh, Judy, you're muted, I think.
I will hit the unmute button. There we go. So as Donna was saying, we sort of started out maybe feeling a little bit out of our comfort zone, not speaking out. And I think we had to sort of tackle some barriers. But as we tackled them one by one, I think that we've all come out for the best. Some areas where I think that patient partners really hit with some impact was with the, we were able to help the researchers understand how the words could be understood by patients, as well as not understood by patients. So something that is glaringly normal in one person's reading is hurtful in another. And So Marilyn had mentioned that there were challenges with recruiting, and we were really pleased to be able to meet with the nurse case manager, take a look at their recruitment letter, and offer some suggestions. Marilyn had mentioned the hook. The original letter, I was concerned, was more about me. I'm a person with multiple chronic illnesses, asking me to help the research figure out ways to help the health system. We sort of reworded that a little bit, because how is this going to help my health? And that would be a hook for me. So we did a little bit of rewording. We also helped with the recruiting poster and the script that the nurse case managers used. One of our biggest issues was a patient questionnaire, where we identified that there were questions that would be really difficult for a patient with multiple chronic illnesses to answer. And a really exciting addition came out of us patient partners trying to understand the patient's journey through the program. Next slide. There we go. So the patient journey map, we took what we understood as a timeline of this program, and we created a simple graphic. We were excited to bring it to the researchers for confirmation that we did indeed understand the program. And they were able to come back and give us confirmation. We were able to edit it. And in doing so, we created a useful tool for patients to understand their overall program, as well as where they were in the journey. And next slide. So we also added, the researchers asked us to add a little bit of a timeline so the patient would know where they were in the program, a spot for notes. And this would be a nice handy little thing for a patient to bring home if they wanted to tell their spouse or a supportive family member about what they were partaking in. So next slide. So this is my idea of patient partners being involved in research. So when research first begins, in the beginning, you only have the absolute basics, it's black and white. Next slide. And next you start to build your team. Who do you need at the table? So you get a little bit more color in this information. In the next slide. So you bring in others with the expertise that you need. And then the final slide. But if you want a robust picture, you can bring in patient partners. Their life experience will add a level of fullness to your research. Note that I had 2 patient partners listed. As Donna had mentioned, we bring in several different things, our different skills, our different abilities, our different experiences. We support one another. Sometimes I will have a question and I didn't feel comfortable to speak out at the team meeting. So I would send a note to Donna, and Donna and I would go, neither of us understand that. So then there was sort of the power of the 2. And then we would come forward and go, we don't understand this, or could you explain this better to us? And it's a really powerful thing to have other patient partners involved. So next slide. Our takeaway, or your takeaway, we hope, is not to just tick a box to bring in a patient partner to your research. Please partner with patients, because we can really help make your overall view more robust. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. I'm just going to jump in for 1 sec, Alana, before we start to have a conversation. I want to say, and it might come out in our questions or conversation, that as much as Judy and Donna point out their angst or concern about how to work with researchers and how to voice their worries or concerns, those of us who hadn't worked with patient partners before had a similar feeling, not knowing how to engage, how best to capitalize on the great experiences around the table. And I do agree with this notion of it being a journey in any relationship. So it has its great moments and it has its challenging moments. We have had challenging moments. And one of the things for folks to know on the call today is that this local team is just one example of the 5 teams across the country that have this same kind of structure in each location. And then each of those groups, so for example, the patient partner group have equivalent colleagues in the other provinces and form a group themselves around how they give input and help guide. And we had a really challenging moment over that questionnaire that Judy pointed out as a team, because those of us with this kind of science background and a validated instrument and damn, these people wanted to change it. It was like, what are you talking about? And but you know what? That bump particularly made us a much better national team, and how we found our way through it. So I can see both Judy and Donna nodding their head. I think it was a pivotal moment for us in trying to do the work. The only other thing I wanted to say is that do come back, because at some point, I'm not talking to Judy and Donna, but those who are at the seminar today, we will come back with the realist evaluation findings as we march toward the end. There's been this little event called a pandemic in the middle of it that's certainly challenged, like everybody else who is a researcher here participating, trying to roll out a study in that context. So we don't actually have findings of the study at the moment, but this notion of sharing with you what's been our journey for the actual doing of the study, we thought was important as well. One other acknowledgement I didn't make at the beginning, I just want to say Brian Condren's on the call, and he was a research associate with this team as well for a period of time. So thanks, Brian, for joining us.
Great. And yeah, let's open it up to discussion, questions, comments. Hopefully people can turn on their mics, but also you can put things in the chat.
And not to take away from time, but I wondered if Donna and Judy wanted to say anything about your counterparts in the other provinces and any of the networking or regular sort of contact that you've had and how you've supported one another.
I'd love to, because this was really a unique kind of opportunity, and over time, I mean, we met regularly, and what was interesting is every province had, while there might have been similar issues, there were being handled, things were being handled maybe in a different way, and we learned from each other. So there might be something somebody would say, "Oh wow, what you're doing there, I would love if we could do it." And so they go away and be able to say to their team, "Well, you know, in Nova Scotia they're doing this. Why can't we do this?" So there was, it was really useful from a learning. And I think as a group, we ended up being individually and as a group stronger and better contributors, because some of the things we could also work through. And we had, the diversity of the group was phenomenal, from somebody who had like 15 years of research experience, very comfortable in that environment, to somebody who'd never been a patient partner and first project, no connection. And it worked really well. Like, it really showed the power of diversity. You know, we talk about it a lot, and having different, and it was challenging at times, because sometimes it's a lot easier if everybody has the same kind of perspective and you can get through things quickly. But in the end, it ended up being much more valuable. So that was, and we will probably stay in touch. I mean, the project hasn't ended, but it's been really a really big piece. So I, you know, from feedback in terms of the funding and the whole thinking how that collaboration thing, there's a lot of value in it.
I might just mention the a more recent project that we've done around patient partner engagement, which we're presenting on at, or some folks are presenting. Judy, you are, I think, at NAPCRAG. So this piece was sort of a side project, because doesn't have to do directly with case management, but we looked at everybody's, so both the research team and the patient partners' perspectives. Everyone was interviewed by independent researchers, and it was asking about, you know, previous experience with how it's gone, challenges, things that have worked well. And then the research, a number of different researchers and the patient partners then came together to develop consensus around the coding framework as well as the findings. And it really was such a neat project, because we were really working as equals, I thought, and we were collaborating. And I think it really helped like iron out some of the, oh, these were the challenges that we had. And we were able to talk about them and sort of learn from them. And so I think that was a really excellent piece. And obviously not every research project has the capacity to do, this to empirically look at their patient engagement. But even if you could do it in a more informal way, I think it's excellent for rapport building for sure. And teaches, lets you kind of learn some of the lessons that you might not learn in just by doing the research.
Alana, I just want to add to that, because an interesting aspect of that is when we did the original interviews with the patient partners, they were detailed, was like a year ago. And the benefit of doing it midterm project is there were changes and things that happened because of that review. So it's instead of waiting to the end of a project and sort of doing an evaluation, and then it's like lessons for another project, we were able to actually apply it. And I think there was an evolution of the relationship because of that.
Are there questions from folks on the call who'd like to ask, or from their experience share something?
Can I ask a question of the group? And if it's quiet, how many people on the call have been working with patient partners on research? I'm just curious.
Yes.
Hands up.
Put their hands up, yeah.
Is there anybody who hasn't?
I just wanted to give a quick comment. I have done some research with Dr. Pat McGraw, and it was with parents who had children with intellectual disabilities across Canada. And so they were brought on to the research team and involved in some of the decisions. So some of what you're saying is a bit similar to what we found also. And certainly the main points was when the parents got together. So yeah, you say more, two or more. And so coming together and really feeling included. And it was really important for the researchers to be kind and respectful and engaging and listening. So what I love about your research that's really sticking out for me today is the secret sauce. I'm going to remember that, and just and the garden. I mean, just those images are really helpful to me, and it is contextual, and it does take that work. So I really love that, and it's just so important. So yeah, I'm really enjoying your presentation. But see if other people have comments.
Thanks, Megan.
This is Bev. I just want to say this is wonderful to hear the comments and how this has moved forward so strongly. I know Donna and Judy, with your perseverance and helping us understand how patient partners bring so much value. We knew they brought a lot of value, but to demonstrate and to try to actually educate us into how, as Fred had mentioned, how to work with patient partners in research efficiently, and as one. That's wonderful. It's great to hear everything.
It's learning on our part as well. I mean, it's one thing to come in with your own life experience and saying, well, this doesn't work. But we understand that the research project has very set ways of doing things. So it's a tightrope on everybody's part, and you're just trying to keep balance the entire time. And it was a learning experience, I think, for all of us in different ways. But I think we kind of got out there in the middle of the canyon and kept on going.
Catherine.
I really enjoyed the presentation. I'm just wondering, Judy and Donna, if you've thought about next steps in terms of your role now as seasoned researchers and patient representatives, of being able to be mentors to others, expanding your role and expanding capacity of other people to share and engage in research. That would be amazing. Just wonder if you've thought about that.
Well, I'll throw in, because when I joined the project, it was my first research project, and I really had not a lot to do in the field. And at one point, I was thinking of walking away from the research side, and I was focused on healthcare delivery. But since then, a lot has evolved. And as some of you know, the MSSU has made quite a commitment to the patient partner role in governance. So I've joined the Patient Partner Council and some of the governance committees in the last few months. And one of the things that we just began talking about is the mentor program and some form of putting something. So and that's like top of my list. So
It's similar to Donna. I think I'm likely to stay I'm more focused with primary health care within Nova Scotia Health. I have a passion for patients being able to have their voice heard in small quality improvement areas. But Nova Scotia Health is also looking towards a mentorship program. So I would love to be involved in that. But I'm also involved with CTNHR with their community of practice and with their inpatient engagement team. So working quite heavily with that group.
The other thing I'd add is Donna and Judy, the provincial gathering of folks playing these kind of roles, you know, how you become peer mentors in that kind of gathering that you began late 2019, mid 2019, I forget when it was.
Well, we had, some of you would be aware, we had planned the first, Judy and I were on the planning committee for the first provincial conference for bringing together patient family advisors, and we included patient partners. And so it was the first time for Nova Scotia to and you know, people have been really operating in isolation. And then of course, it was May of the year, COVID. So that was canceled, deferred, but we started a webinar series, and we had two of them, which were incredibly successful in terms of participation. And researchers would be happy to know we gathered a lot of data. We had some really good surveys, and it was really useful in developing next steps and where we go. And we're right now planning the conference for May 2022. So yeah, you'll hear more about it. Yeah, so very exciting.
I think the other framing for us today is we were talking a little bit about context, and there's this context of the study team that you've heard, I think, a fair bit about today for us and what it's been like to evolve that way. There's the context of the study itself in primary care practices, which is a new reality for primary care practices. And for those of you that work in almost any healthcare setting, you'll realize that the challenges of personnel inside healthcare settings these days, and the turnover or the needs being greater than we have staffing for, has created the challenge of how do you keep research projects going in a new setting that hasn't had the culture of research, where staff are turning over a lot. And so that's another context for the implementation of the study. And then there's the context of folks with chronic conditions who are trying to look after themselves, and how can the health system support them to do that. And then there's the context of the policy and how our organizational structures support those clinics and how they operate. So it's been a fascinating conversation at different moments as we try to talk about these different contexts as they come into play, particularly to a guy who was, you know, born and raised on randomized controlled trials. And so trying to understand what goes on in the black boxes around these implementation pieces, particularly that help facilitate the implementation of case management, so that the notion about what is the secret sauce in that setting that allows case management to realize its full potential that we know from other studies could and should be possible. So just this whole notion of context for us has been, I think, quite substantial as a research team.
All right, we have a few more minutes if anyone else had comments. Oh, two. I have another. Oh, thanks, Crystal. And Lauren says, can you elaborate on language issues and learnings?
they have well, I think one of the major things was that, as Alana had mentioned, sort of the key lead group is in Quebec. So there have been translation issues sort of along the travels, but I think most significantly was the 2 patient partners in Quebec. And I think that, you hear lost in translation, and that's kind of what happened. I think that a lot of times they felt like they were outsiders. And I think there's been some learning with that, and I'm hoping that, we get better at it, but it has been a challenge.
I think the other part of that, Judy, is you and Donna tend to remind us that we use research lingo. What do you call it? Researchese?
You guys speak researchese.
Right.
Yeah.
And we have to be mindful that that's really can be really polarizing if somebody doesn't understand what an RCT is, when you throw out these acronyms, or even a randomized control trial. No offense. I'm not jabbing.
I'm still trying to figure out.
Yeah, so just being mindful of that. And I think this group the patient partners have certainly highlighted that for us. And so we're all a little bit more inclusive, which is nice. Yeah.
I just want to say, this is a kind of a next step, but I think everybody's thinking about, diversity and equity is a big priority on everybody's agenda. And as patient partners, we've been talking about as well, because how do we increase representation? And it's not through the tradition, the way we've been doing things. So that's where some of the work and language comes in, in terms of making people feel even comfortable in a group, where you meet, how you present. So there's a lot of things to do in the area.
Great. Okay, well, it's 1 minute to 1. So I want to thank all of our presenters. Excellent presentation, ideas, and discussion today. And some thank yous in the chat bar too. Great, so this will be available for future viewing, and I guess we can stop the recording now and